that saints are saints based on how they end up, not based on having been like perfect their whole life.
Yeah.
So, St. Paul tells us he's responsible for a bunch of murders. David was responsible for a murder, right? People are responsible for murders. That's not to say, oh, don't worry about it, right? But that is a grievous sin. So then what you have to look for in his life are signs of repentance, right? If we're going to talk about him as a saint. And so that brings us to his baptism.
Yes.
And
legendarily goes, on his deathbed, right? So like he's so little of a Christian, he waited until almost he was dead.
Yes, yeah, that's the one of the raps he gets. So that's not entirely true. So people will they'll generalize past just St. Constantine himself and say, oh, well, everybody got baptized on their deathbed because they thought there was no forgiveness of sins after baptism. And a lot of that is semi-imaginary.
Right.
I'm not saying no one did that, right? But with St. Constantine in particular, we know he wasn't doing that because St. Constantine, near the end of his life, was preparing to begin an Eastern military campaign, meaning he was going after the Persians. And this is a whole subtopic that this episode's going to be a long one, but I don't want it to be this long. Get into relations between him and the Persian Empire. But there was an exchange of letters between him and the Persians, and there were issues with the Persian Empire's persecution of Christians. There were a couple of Persian bishops who were at the Council of Nicaea. It's a whole thing. But so he was going to begin this campaign in the East, and his plan was that on his way to the East to begin to lead this military campaign, he was going to stop off to be baptized in the Jordan.
Yeah, he wanted it where Jesus was baptized.
Yeah. And the then bishop of Aelia Capitolina, formerly known as Jerusalem, was going to be one of the participants who was baptizing him. It was going to be a big thing, right? So he had this all planned, and then he got gravely ill. And so that campaign, at least under him, never happened. We won't talk about Julian the Apostate, his Eastern campaign and what happened there. But so that campaign never happened. And so he ended up, because he was sick, they baptized him where he was, right? And that it ended up being his deathbed, right? But that is because he got sick before the planned baptism. Yeah. And after he received that, what's sort of an emergency baptism, he refused to put back on the imperial garb and refused to issue any more laws. He would only wear his white baptismal robe. And so he spent his last days in repentance. So all of this stuff goes into the understanding of him as Saint Constantine, right? And yes, his life is very different than that of Saint Seraphim of Sarov, right? Or any number of other saints, right? But the saints live different lives.
Yeah.
Right. Saint Constantine's a little more Old Testament saint, maybe, than it's definitely not a monastic saint, right? Yeah. So through all of this, through how he conducts himself, right? Because again, he's figuring this out. How does one be a Christian Roman emperor? Right? How does one go from being the at least semi-divine, right, possessed by a genius, right, semi-divine king and high priest of the Roman state, to being a Christian emperor, ceding spiritual authority to other people, right? He's figuring out how to do this in his own life. But what he sort of figures out is the beginning of sort of the template, sort of the pattern for what a Byzantine emperor, what a czar later is supposed to be like, and how they're supposed to function.